Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining this webinar with Health and Healix. So I just want to start by introducing Health. So we are basically Health work alongside Healix closely, and we're a nationwide mental health provider with clinicians offering a comprehensive range of assessment and treatment services. And we've been working with Healix Health for many years to provide mental health for the mental health needs of their members. So I'd like to introduce Louisa, one of our clinicians who's going to be giving the presentation today. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. Alison Hoskins, who is the founder of PLE Health and the clinical lead. And she's going to be answering any clinical questions that you might have at the end. So thank you very much for joining. And this is the presentation on mental health in a fast-paced world. So I'll pass you over to Louisa now. Thanks.
Thanks, Kira. Thanks, Alison. So, welcome everyone. It's lovely to be here. As per introduction, we're going to be looking at living well in fast-paced world. So in essence, we're looking at some sort of skills for managing our mental health in a context of uncertainty and everyday well-being. In terms of content, we're going to look very briefly in terms of wondering as to how does the living in fast-paced kind of world affect our mental health, and just kind of perceived sense of stress, and looking at recognizing our kind of internal responses to these external stresses, as well as exploring briefly some practical strategies for everyday well-being in a context of supporting our mental health. And right at the end, we're going to leave a couple of minutes to take some questions or comments. So please kind of stay tuned, and if you have any questions throughout, please put them in the Q&A box. That would be lovely. Be lovely to hear. So, why does life feel so stressful right now for most of us? Most likely, we all kind of meet with like high expectations, both internally as well as externally. So most of us do kind of work really hard to achieve the things that we really care about. And all of that is usually in quite a fast sort of pace, moving on constantly. And in a context of a future that simply cannot be guaranteed. So we don't know how things are going to pan out. Speed and productivity and kind of effectiveness is very much rewarded in modern life. So the more we put in, the more we can sort of achieve, the more we can get out of things, and we all kind of motivated to sort of do well, so exceed at what we do, both personally, perhaps in relationships, or professionally, in terms of career progression and so forth. And there is very much this societal pressure to be happy, to be successful, and actually cope well with things as they happen. So not so much, perhaps there is somewhat kind of underlying stigma there in the context of mental health and not coping. All of that results in effect in us spending quite a significant chunk of our lives in doing mode. So rather than being aware of our reactions, kind of experiences, our inner landscape, we sort of end up just going on automatic pilot and kind of not knowing how we got there at the end of the day. And that understandably leaves a very little space to kind of pause and reflect and allow for some emotional processing. This understandably, again, may kind of lay in a context of the difficulty in particular that we may have in the Western culture with regards to accepting that suffering is part of life. So, you know, any distress, pain, emotional kind of upheaval, all of that comes with living. But we very much, most of us kind of work really hard not to feel any of it, not to experience any of it. And for some of us, then that leads to particular kind of increase in the way that in negative kind of comments towards ourselves. So some sort of judgment, some sort of kind of lack of acceptance for the kind of person that we are or the way that we've managed certain situations. So the way that we kind of understand stress in the context of all of these reflections is that it is a natural response to what life is kind of putting our way rather than a personal flaw. And so overthinking and rumination, the kind of never-ending sort of working of the mind, what actually causes the busy mind, in a context of this uncertain future, how does it kind of come to be? Not sure if you ever wondered as to why do we spend so much time in our minds, and what's the function of this? And this is essentially in what psychology has explored about the kind of workings of the mind, in a sense that our minds, through the kind of evolution and being kind of as effective as they can be, became very great at or very good at problem solving in terms of practical issues. But that strategy is less helpful in a context of emotional pain or uncertainty. And it can often lead to kind of worrying so much about the future in a context of what if things not going to go to plan, or what if I'm going to be sort of, you know, achieving less than intended, or potentially ruminating about the past. So here we are kind of sitting and thinking to ourselves, I should have done, you know, better. I should have kind of managed this situation much more effectively in the past. And doing all of these things, you know, worrying about what's to come, or kind of molding over what already has happened, is simply an attempt to control the outcome of the future that's uncertain to us. And that essentially contributes to us living in our heads instead of the present moment. And of course, there's a cost of doing that. And there's a cost of always doing more, even if it's like physical doing, or perhaps that kind of mental doing in our heads. I'm sure most of you can kind of, you know, experience or at least kind of recall situations or more stressful situations in your lives when all of these things may have been affected. So perhaps our kind of mood gets affected in a sense of anxiety, feeling low or lower than usual, feeling irritated or kind of angry. Ongoing kind of stress or distress may lead to reduced kind of enjoyment and less of the motivation to do things that used to kind of really matter to us. And so all of that being kind of squashed in a very limited space in our lives, when we gradually begin to do less and less of the things that perhaps would have given us some sort of sense of achievement or pleasure. And of course, in the longer term, ongoing kind of impact of that on ourselves maybe, lower confidence, and sort of self-esteem, whereby we sort of tend to judge our kind of performance, and specifically when kind of engaging into that rumination. And of course, this is also having an impact on the way we feel physically, the physical bodies that we all have. So difficulty with sleep, not being able to fall asleep, or kind of waking up through the night, constant sense of like exhaustion and tiredness, or just the usual kind of aches, pains and aches in the body. So mental and physical health are deeply kind of interconnected. And so in that context, it's really important to understand and recognize our kind of early warning signs. So how does exactly stress or that kind of perceived distress show up in the bodies or in the mind? It may be things as the kind of the busyness of the mind. So predominantly overestimating the probability of the threat, underestimating our ability to cope with that situation. So the kind of way in which we automatically process new information, harsh kind of self-dialogue, self-criticism, and lack of acceptance for our perceived flaws. Emotionally, the usual, the kind of anxiety, mood swings, anticipatory grief, so kind of perceiving things going to go particularly well, or there's going to be some kind of a loss. Behaviorally, we tend to cope through usually some kind of a way in which we can avoid all of these unpleasant experiences. So whether that's avoidance in the sense of physically kind of not going into any situations that would or tend to make us feel in that way. So maybe kind of, passing on some sort of opportunities there, opportunities at work, opportunities socially, saying no to kind of invitations that we may receive from others. Some sort of withdrawal in a context of social functioning, so kind of taking ourselves away from the usual busyness of things, and just in general doing less in a context of what really matters in our lives. All of that coping, while it may be really sort of helpful in a short term, because it helps us to feel less of these difficult emotions, may have a quite rather negative impact in the long term. So distraction, overworking, numbing strategies, all of that can lead to increase in sort of difficult emotions and rather unhelpful behavior. And of course, longer term may have also negative impact on significant others around us. So our relationships suffer in a sense of reduced connections with others, reduced meaningful kind of being with others, and just more tension in general. So this seems like a vicious cycle that kind of keeps going. The more we engage in these coping behaviors, aiming at reducing the way we feel, the more we tend to suffer as a result. And so you're just getting to the nitty-gritty of like practical tools, like what can we actually do to manage our well-being on an everyday basis? Well, predominantly stepping outside of that automatic pilot, they're switching from their doing mode to the being mode by taking micro pauses. So not many of us could potentially afford to take 2 hours in the middle of the day to kind of to go for a break, to attend a gym, or to altogether to travel to a nice destination. So perhaps doing whatever we can in a context of, you know, a small micro pause works much better than no pause at all, and having lunch at the in front of you, or at the desk. So perhaps things like sort of taking 30 seconds at the time, and just slightly changing the position in which you sit, or maybe even standing up if you spend quite a lot of time sitting down, and simply focusing on your feet on the ground, or maybe even slowing your breath, maybe even noticing your out breath, if that's something that you're comfortable with. So just really kind of observing what's coming up for us moment to moment can really provide that crucial spaciousness between this is me, and all of the things that kind of matter for me in life, and this is my reactivity, so reacting in the moment without actually thinking about what, how I want to kind of show up. Another strategy that may be of help in response to difficult situations, or difficult or stressful moments, could be a practice that sort of stems from mindfulness, called dropping anchor. So simply taking that micro pause and focusing on the breath, through noticing, how does distress show up for me? So what kind of thoughts, what kind of feelings, what kind of urges to do things do I notice in that very moment right now? And from that place, expanding it again to the body as a whole, taking into account all of the things that may remind us as to what really matters for us. What got me out of the bed in the morning? What got me through to get to work on time? What is kind of important for me in a context of the kind of person or partner, parent, or a friend I want to be after work? So we call this in psychology acting in line with our values. So then it becomes more of a meaningful action taking, rather than stemming from the perceived pressure from the outside. What really matters as well is taking small, achievable actions. So not so much the kind of massive sort of steps, like if I wanted to take part in marathon, I wouldn't be able to simply do it straight away. I'd have to kind of train for it. So I'd have to break down into small, manageable chunks the huge task of being ready for that marathon. And how often do we do that when it comes to our mental health and the way we feel? How often do we break things into small, manageable chunks? We tend to go on that automatic pilot and kind of say to ourselves, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take part in this massive project at work, and I'm going to do it next week. And with no preparation, no sort of, giving ourselves some kind of leeway in which we practice some of the skills, where we have enough of a space to actually notice what's going on and what kind of resources we may need in place. So how often do we actually allow enough time for reflection and asking for help? That's something to reflect upon, hopefully. And finally, if not one of the biggest kind of practical steps that we can take, is changing the attitude towards ourselves and our experience. as we try to go through life and achieve all of these things that matter to us by motivating ourselves through criticism, it's kind of a short-lived strategy, because if you imagine a scenario in which you're going for a hike and you've got a friend that comes along with you, or a companion at least, and when you're struggling, when you really feel tired and you can't get going, you really are at the end of your feather, and that particular companion kind of talks to you in a way that's supposed to make you feel more motivated, kind of wants to kind of rushes you, and sort of maybe says things like, just move on, how much time will you spend resting? There's not time, come on, you need to get going. It depends what sort of tone of voice they use, right? But what kind of a friend would you prefer to have with you on that really challenging hike? Would it be somebody who talks to you through criticism and kind of encourages you in a harsh way, or to be somebody who simply sort of is there for you and maybe kind of invites you to take yet another step? Keep going, let's keep going, but I know that you're struggling, right? Yeah. So maybe that's something that we can offer to ourselves. In a moment of struggle, we usually tend to kind of apply the same strategy. We sort of say to ourselves in a tone of voice, like, come on, like, you're such a weak person, such a failure for not being able to do it. Come on, keep going. And instead of that, maybe we could kind of change that attitude to more of a accepting one, more of a sort of warm one, as if we're talking to a best friend, like, yeah, I really understand. I know that you're struggling, but just keep going if you can. And if not, let's find some help, right? And self-compassion, it's like a skill. It's not something that we grow up with. For most of us, self-compassion may not have been modeled by the significant others, so the people we kind of grew up with. And if you take into account the changes, societal changes in the last decade or couple of decades, that is really shifting. It's shifting in a positive direction for all of us. So it's really worth investing in practicing self-compassion, and you may want to do that through potentially everyday sort of compassionate gestures. So maybe creating some space and time in your busy day to do something that would be a compassionate thing to do, or perhaps through the use of guided self-compassion. So all of that, well, bearing in mind that small changes practiced regularly create meaningful habits. So it's not so much throwing oneself into the deep end, but setting some manageable kind of steps that it becomes something that you can rely upon. And in the long run, this leads to being able to build some resilience. So resilience really helps in a sense of being able to cope or kind of bounce back from difficult experiences that life throws at us. And this growth can be achieved, or we could kind of go in that direction through increased self-awareness. So being mindful, being aware of our inner kind of reactions or patterns in which we're responding to things. Connection with others, so increasing meaningful connections and relationships, as well as taking action that matters. So it's not so much about being strong all the time, but being kind of wiser and doing things that really matter to you. And just want to kind of pass along this message, like, you don't have to do this alone. There is so much in a context of us being able to get from others externally. So reaching out to friends or family or kind of meaningful support network, professional support as and when needed, and just bearing in mind that asking for help is not a sign of weakness.